Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, the 14th of August, 2025. We are now 678 days into war, ethnic cleansing, violence. Death tolls are well over 60,000 people in the Gaza Strip, tens of thousands of children having been killed or malnourished. There still remain roughly 50 hostages in the Gaza Strip, of whom it's believed maybe 20 are alive. I have lots of news from the Middle East. I was in Jerusalem for a few days. I also was in Amman, Jordan, for meetings. I hope that we'll do a public briefing on that. If that's of interest, you should, put a note in the chat, or if you're watching this via video, reach out to info@cmep.org. I don't currently have one scheduled, but I'm happy to do that if that would be helpful. I think the bottom line is that the situation is desperate, and after the vote of the Israeli cabinet to take over Gaza City, we keep thinking it can't get worse, and then decisions like that are made. And so you have more than 600,000, 800,000 people back in North Gaza, and they are being displaced again. I just came out of a board call where the conversation was that if that population is asked to move from North Gaza, it will be a death march because many of the people are malnourished and don't have the physical ability because of lack of water and food and nutrition to even be able to do, a walk to the south of Gaza, let alone the fact that they would do so under bombs, that they would do so under warfare. So let me go into updates from the past week. I wanted to start just by telling you the words of a Palestinian who leads an international development agency there. He's one of the privileged. He's one of the few who delivers aid, and he and his family are suffering from malnutrition and starvation. And, I asked him where he was going to go with the news of the displacement of Gaza City. I said, "We're worried about you. Where will you go? Our prayers continue to be with you." And he responded with this. He said, "I don't have an answer to your question. I don't even want to think about it. Still, it takes away any rest or sleep that we might be able to have of every one of us here. The challenge of starvation is so much stronger. When combining starvation with fear, the worst formula of torture is prepared. This is what Israel is doing to us. In fact, Dr. May, I don't think that prayers help or that prayers are needed. Maybe the only prayer is a prayer for death." I wanted to start with that because as we give news about what's happening in Gaza, I think that we can't ignore the desperate plea of the people who are living there saying, "Please make these horrors end." So news from the last week related to the Gaza Strip. Yesterday, on Wednesday, Palestinians reported the heaviest bombardments in recent weeks in the areas that are east of Gaza City. This was just hours after Netanyahu said that he had aimed to expedite the IDF plans for the new expanded offensive to take place against Hamas. He said it would be fairly quick, that he wanted it to move fairly quickly. The IDF had said that they thought it would take them 3 months to prepare. Yesterday, also on Wednesday, it was reported that Gaza City had come under intense air attack. The Israeli forces are preparing to launch the operation to occupy the city. Around 12,000 children under the age of 5 in Gaza are suffering from acute malnutrition, and the number of hunger-related deaths are increasing. That was the Director General of the World Health Organization. Over the past several hundred days, we've seen the chart that once starvation begins and once you start to see famine, there will be an exponentially higher number of deaths. Commercial satellite images have shown that the Israeli military building up forces and equipment for the ground invasion in Gaza. This is 3 U.S. officials and a formal official doing an analysis of imagery. Armed group that were posing as aid workers. They were using a vehicle that was marked with the World Central Kitchen logo. The strike took place last week and killed 5 armed terrorists, according to a statement from the IDF. COGAT, which is the coordinators for government activities in the territories, that it contacted the World Central Kitchen and that they confirmed that that was not one of their vehicles. On Tuesday, it was reported, according to the United Nations, that only 1.5% of cropland is accessible and suitable to cultivation. 1.5%. Now listen to this. Those figures since March have decreased from 4%. The director of the Food Agricultural Organization said that Gaza is on the brink of a full-scale famine. People are starving because food is unavailable. not because food is unavailable, but because access is blocked. Local agri-food systems have collapsed, and families can no longer sustain even the most basic livelihoods. This past week, the Israeli military announced that Air Force planes attacked and destroyed a launch site in Shudayia. This is in the Gaza Strip. 2 rockets had been fired toward the Gaza border communities earlier on Saturday from that location, according to the IDF. Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for that rocket fire. And on Saturday, I didn't give death toll numbers for each day this past week, but Saturday, at least 38 people were killed in a 24-hour period of time. 21 of them were reported to be near humanitarian distribution sites. There were 11 additional cases of death due to malnutrition and starvation in that 24-hour period of time. In early hours on Friday, this is the Security Council decision, or the Security Cabinet, they approved that plan for the IDF to enter and take over Gaza City. Netanyahu suggested the cabinet did vote on 5 specific principles. I'll talk about those a bit more in a minute, but the 5 principles are disarming Hamas, the return of all hostages, dead or alive, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, Israeli security control of the Gaza Strip, and a new government in Gaza that is neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. Now, for the record, that contradicts a lot of the same issues that are being addressed in negotiations for ceasefire. These 5 points contradict. So you'll hear about that more in a minute. The chief of staff of the IDF, Zamir, Lieutenant General Zamir in Israel, warned against the plan to take over Gaza City. There's more news about that in the news today. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But Zamir was ardently against the plan. 4 security officials announced this previously, and more is coming out about that in the news now. The military leadership prefers a new ceasefire, according to officials. The deadline for the first phase of the newly approved Israeli operation, which includes the evacuation of Gaza City and the expansion of aid distribution, is October 7th, the second anniversary of the attacks. Israel will significantly expand the humanitarian aid effort, and forgive me, so they say. I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric and then there's a lot of different actions. They said that is part of the plan, increased aid distribution. Now, Israelis are saying it's impossible. Zamir said in that Security Council meeting that there are inadequate hospital services and aid, and it's impossible to adequately care for the population that will be displaced if that plan related to Gaza City moves forward. So we're reeling from that decision. I'd point you to the Churches for Middle East Peace statement that condemns those actions. Many other organizations are condemning it as well. But the reason the Israeli security establishment opposes this move is often for tactical reasons, in that they say it will drain the Israeli army. There are not enough reservists. They say they don't have the financial or human resources to be able to carry out a plan of that magnitude, but also because it will endanger the lives of the remaining Israeli hostages. Last week, Egypt said that hostages would be at risk of execution if there's an invasion of Gaza City. In response to that decision, opposition in Israel strongly opposes the plan. They said it means hostages and soldiers will die. That was Yair Lapid. He said that right after the meeting and on Sunday. He also said, we need to make a deal, bring all the hostages home and finish the war. The leader of the Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, criticized the president's words. Too many words, too little action, too much time. Yair Golan, who leads the left-wing Democratic Party in Israel, said what we saw tonight is not one step away from victory, but the most severe security failure in the history of Israel. A prime minister who's abandoning dozens of Israeli citizens in captivity to their deaths. He is in danger of endangering the security of the entire country. Trump has said that he's not going to oppose this plan for the expansion of military occupation of Gaza. The Israeli Security Cabinet, approved it, as I mentioned, on Friday. Now, many are grieving in Gaza the death of another reporter. 5 Al Jazeera journalists were killed in a targeted Israeli strike near Gaza City on Sunday, August 10th. And one of those reporters was Al Jazeera's Anas al-Sharif. Hamas said that al-Sharif's death is a barbaric crime that surpasses all limits of fascism and criminality. The IDF confirmed the strike. They said Anas served as the head of a terrorist cell. They also said, the IDF, that they had advanced rocket attacks on Israeli citizens and IDF troops. The Committee to Protect Journalists said Israel has not provided evidence to support that attack and targeted assassination. The Israeli airstrike that did kill those journalists heightened tensions with Qatar. They're the network's funder for Al Jazeera and the key mediator in efforts to end the war in Gaza. They said that targeting was deliberate. Amnesty International called for an independent and impartial investigation. On Sunday, August 10th, Prime Minister Netanyahu defeated his government's plan to take control of Gaza City despite widespread opposition and criticism from longtime allies and domestic opponents. And I just wanted to review again those 5 principles because we'll be hearing about them a lot. One was the disarmament of Hamas, which many security officials have said is not possible for Hamas to be defeated, that it's not just the military of Hamas, it's an ideology. Number 2 was the return of the 50 hostages, about 20 of whom are believed to be alive. Number 3 is the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Number 4 is Israeli security over the Gaza Strip. And number 5 is the existence of an alternative civilian government, not Hamas and not the PA. Egypt has said that the Gaza takeover would lead to the execution of hostages, as I mentioned. And National Security Advisor Hanekbi in Israel, who's a close confidant to Netanyahu, also opposes the plan for the military operation of Gaza. And yet it's moving forward. Even conservative groups in the United States, these are Jewish groups that are considered unilaterally pro-Israel, the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, they warn that the Israeli takeover of Gaza will endanger not only hostages, but innocent Palestinians. Nonetheless, Chief of Staff of the IDF is fully mobilized and prepared to execute this plan for the expanded operation, now that the Security Cabinet has given it a green light. 300 Israeli architects and planners have signed a petition called Stop the Destruction. They expressed deep shock at the acts of destruction, killing, starvation, and mass deportations. They said, we can't forget the horrific attacks and crimes on October 7th, massacre, destruction, and the abduction of civilians by Hamas from border communities. But these atrocities do not justify the indiscriminate harming of civilians, women, or children, and the near total destruction of the Gaza Strip. They cited that more than 280,000 housing units have been destroyed, as well as 2,300 educational institutions, dozens of hospitals and clinics, hundreds of mosques, churches, markets, shops, factories, and infrastructure and farmland. Between Saturday and Sunday of last weekend, 59 Palestinians in Gaza were killed, 363 were injured over the past 24 hours. During that period of time, 35 people were killed while trying to obtain aid. So the death toll of last weekend was 61,430 at a minimum of people in the Gaza Strip who've been killed. The number of those wounded was well over 150,000. Earlier on Sunday, 5 people, it was announced, had died of hunger and malnutrition. That included 2 children. So that brought the number of fatalities from malnutrition up to 217 people. Israel used U.S. munitions to illegally and indiscriminately attack school shelters in Gaza. That was Human Rights Watch, who issued a report that was published Thursday, a week ago. The report suggested that there were no military targets at the 2 schools that were targeted where U.S. weapons were used. OSHA has now announced that more than 500 humanitarian workers have been killed. That includes 167 women. This is the highest number of UN workers in any conflict in the history of the United Nations. The U.S. announced this week that the airdrops for aid into Gaza have not been a serious consideration for the U.S. Trump administration, even though the Biden administration oversaw the dropping of aid through air deliveries of more than 1,220 tons of assistance. It's good news that the U.S. isn't thinking about used to allow aid into Gaza. Updates on the ceasefire negotiations. Netanyahu has signaled that the efforts are now centered on a comprehensive deal that would release all the remaining hostages. Mediators, Egypt and Qatar, are working on a framework to that end. This news came as a Hamas delegation was in Egypt this past week. And we're praying that that comes to fruition. It's in complete contradiction with this whole Gaza takeover plan. And so that is news in that regard. Now, South Sudan has been in conversations with Israel over the possibility of resettling Palestinians. And sources say that the where the talks are right now, it's unclear, but if this is carried out, the plans would amount to transferring a people group from one war-ravaged land at risk of famine to another to raise human rights concerns. President Trump spoke with Netanyahu on Sunday, August 10th, where both leaders discussed Israel's plans for taking control of Gaza and efforts to secure a hostage release. And over the weekend, Netanyahu said that one of the reasons for the fighting in the Gaza Strip has continued because of hostage negotiations. Sunday, it was reported that the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar reported progress in ceasefire talks. Again, this includes a proposal. Listen to how much this contradicts the whole Gaza City takeover plan. The proposal for a ceasefire agreement includes the full withdrawal of Israel from all of the Gaza Strip, the release of all hostages, as two of the main components of the discussion. One of the senior Hamas officials who was present confirmed the mediators' effort, but said the movement has not been updated on whether or not there have been developments in that regard. Finally, White House Special Envoy Witkoff met with Qatar's prime minister in Spain over the weekend. This was a part of all of the, potential for a ceasefire agreement. It was said that Washington is going to present an endgame proposal for the war in Gaza to be brought to an end in coming weeks. So lots of contradicting news, but that's an update on ceasefire negotiations. There have been continued attacks by extremist settlers in the West Bank. One of the people who was killed in the past 2 weeks was a Palestinian activist from the village of Umm in the South Hebron Hills. His last name is Hapalin. New video footage was just released. He was actually videoing settler attacks when he was shot. And that video has now gone public. He was killed in the West Bank as an Israeli settler fired towards him during a confrontation with unarmed Palestinians. He was not involved in the protests, but was just recording them. And on Sunday, eyewitnesses in Jericho reported that a 25-year-old man from Nazareth was fatally shot by Israeli forces. Moving on to some news about what's happening in Israel, the family forum of hostages, the mother of hostage Matan Zonkauer said that after the statement by Netanyahu about the attacks in Gaza City, that the state has decided to go to war to destroy the people of Israel. They're sacrificing hostages, soldiers, and the values of our country. From now on, it's up to us as civilians to launch a relentless public struggle. There's been a call in Israel for to shut down the economy of Israel so that Israel will stop the war in Gaza. Families of hostages and fallen soldiers called for a nationwide strike in Israel on August 17th. This is to protest the Gaza City operation. Democratic Party leader Yair Golan has said his party will join in the strike. And as I mentioned, hostage families are calling for a shutdown of the Israeli economy as a protest to the cabinet's announcement about the takeover of Gaza City. They said, will you be with us to hold everything, shut it all down? It was decided to expand the war and to occupy, even at the cost of the hostages' life. Silence is deadly. Moving on to Iran, a senior official from the UN watchdog agency, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, is traveling to Iran. They were there earlier this week on Monday. There were no visits to nuclear sites planned. Iran has been accused of violation of its non-proliferation obligation. And there are continued concerns about crackdowns in Iran, as reports indicate that 20 alleged spies for the Israeli Mossad were arrested in Iran over recent months. Some have been executed. So Wednesday, Iran executed a nuclear scientist who was convicted of spying for Israel and passing on information about another nuclear scientist who was killed in the Israeli airstrikes on Iran back in June. A couple of updates about Lebanon. There's a move to have Hezbollah disarm. Hezbollah has said it's going to disregard that decision by Lebanon's government. They said that it would be a monopoly of arms if only the Lebanese state is armed. So they're refusing to give up their arsenal, even though the U.S. and others are calling for the disarmament. Lebanese media has reported that one person was killed in an Israeli strike on South Lebanon. And the U.S. presented Lebanon with a plan for disarming Hezbollah by the end of the year. This also would include the halting of Israeli military operations in South Lebanon and securing a full withdrawal of its troops from the 5 positions where they still remain in the south of the Lebanese state. Now, there still is a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah, even though Israel's in violation of it with its continued presence in the south of Lebanon. So just to finish on Syria, Jordan was supposed to meet with U.S. and Syrian officials on Tuesday. This is following more than a decade of conflict. So I haven't heard the outcomes of that meeting. A couple updates about things that are happening internationally before I close with the updates on Christians in the Middle East. In a joint statement yesterday, foreign ministers from 27 countries urged Israel to grant immediate permanent access to the United Nations. They're calling for a flood of aid into Gaza as there's a famine that's unfolding before our eyes. New Zealand's prime minister said that Netanyahu has lost the plot and Israel's planned occupation of Gaza is utterly unacceptable. President Trump, in an interview with Axios, stopped short of directly supporting Israel's plans to occupy Gaza City. So, as I said, the U.S. is not going to intervene, at least from what it looks like right now. But France, Germany, and the U.K. told the UN that they're willing to reinstate sanctions. This is actually in relationship to Iran, if Iran does not, respond appropriately over its nuclear program. The UN Security Council had an emergency meeting related to the Gaza City situation. That's where UK, France, and others warned that the plan to take over Gaza City risks violating international humanitarian law. And then there's going to be a lot happening in September around the UN General Assembly. Several states plan to acknowledge the Palestinian state. Australia is one of them. New Zealand is questioning whether or not they will move in that direction. So I wanted to let you know about that. Germany actually halted certain arms exports to Israel. This is a really unprecedented move. So there has been at least a partial arms embargo to the Israeli state from Germany, but the Chancellor Merz has assured that there's no change in Germany's core policies vis-a-vis Israel. And then my last international update was I wanted to let you know that the UK deemed an organization called Palestine Action as a terrorist organization. And this last weekend, 466 people in London were arrested for protesting that decision. According to UK law, people who support that group or are members of it could spend up to 14 years in prison. So now getting to churches and Christians in the Middle East, I did meet with several of the patriarchs and heads of churches when I was in Jerusalem. There is still an ongoing pressure on the churches. The Greek Orthodox actually had their bank account closed because of the desire or the actions by the Jerusalem municipality and the Arnona tax issue. And so we've talked about this. And if you're not familiar, you can read CMEP's past statements. But the churches have had an agreement where they don't pay taxes since Jerusalem became a part of Israel in 1967 after the Six-Day War. And there has been an attempt to have churches pay back taxes for that. And there was not a differentiation between places of worship and church-owned properties that are for profit. So, churches own hotels or churches own, other types of organizations. And so Arnona has been an attempt to tax even the places of worship. Now, in conversations with U.S. Ambassador Huckabee, he opposes U.S. Christian worship sites from having to pay those taxes. But that Arnona issue is back on the table. It's been very problematic. So that is one of the key issues being discussed by churches specifically in Jerusalem. Just a couple other final updates as I close. I mentioned Churches for Middle East Peace put out that statement opposing the Israeli plan to occupy Gaza City. I would call your attention to that. I wanted to let you know there's going to be a day of prayer. This is being hosted by Lausanne. Lausanne is an international evangelical movement. The day of prayer is September 10th, and there'll be an online vigil with Lausanne at 10 a.m. I actually was asked, I'm a part of the Lausanne movement, and I was asked to lead a cohort on war and peace that will focus specifically on Israel and the Palestinian crisis, but not exclusively on it. And so the cohort for Lausanne is going to be launched at that prayer gathering September 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And finally, the dates for Christ at the Checkpoint, which is the conference that's facilitated by the Institute of Faith and Justice and Bethlehem Bible College, Peace and Justice. Those dates have been announced. So Christ at the Checkpoint is going to be May 26th and through 30th in 2026. The theme of Christ at the Checkpoint is kingdom ethics in the face of war and genocide. and we're being invited to mark those dates, and that registration will be available soon. So that's an update of this past week. May God go before us in our continued efforts towards peace.